Hey, fellow nodes. So, today we are going to start with systems, their classification, and properties. So, we'll first learn the classification of systems, that is, continuous time systems and discrete time systems, and then we will move on to some basic properties of systems. So, first, let us understand what is a continuous time system. If the input and output of a system are continuous, then we can call it a continuous time system. Or you could say that it will convert a continuous time input into a continuous time output. Over here, x of t is the input, and the continuous time system transformed it into y of t, which is again continuous. Let us see an example for a continuous time system. Here we have an RC circuit. Vs is the source voltage, and we'll take it as the input. Vc is the voltage across the capacitor, and we'll take it as the output. I is the current in the circuit. Using Ohm's law, we can write the current through this resistor is going to be net voltage across it divided by the resistance. Current as a function of time, I of t will be equal to voltage at this point for this resistor will be Vs. So we'll take Vs as a function of time minus the voltage it gets over here will be whatever is the potential across the C. So Vc of t divided by resistance R. But we have a capacitor over here across which there is a voltage Vc and some current I is flowing through it. We have a relation for current flowing through a capacitor. We can write I of t is C dV by dt. That is C Vc of t divided by dt. Now, since they are both the current in the circuit, they'll be equal. We can write C dVc of dt by dt should be equal to Vs of t minus Vc of t divided by R. Let's divide the whole thing by C. So it becomes dVc of t by dt is equal to Vs of t divided by Rc minus Vc of t divided by Rc. Now let's rearrange it a little bit by taking this term to the other side, which will give us dVc of t by dt plus Vc of t by Rc is equal to Vs of t by Rc. Let's put this in the box. We know Vc of t, which we find over here, is our output, and Vs of t is our input. So we can conclude that this is a differential equation that describes the relationship between input Vs of t and output Vc of t. Let's take a look at another example. We have a raindrop over here and it is falling down. Its velocity at a particular time is v of t and it is falling down due to gravity. So we'll take the gravitational force F of t as the input and we're taking the velocity of this raindrop at a particular time as the output. Now, you know that when raindrop is falling in the air, gravity is not the only force that acts on it. There will be air resistance also. And in 12th standard, when you are learning mechanical properties of fluids, you have learned that the resistive force is given by some equation 6 pi eta rho v. This whole thing is a constant. So F is proportional to v, where v is the velocity of the raindrop at that particular time. So to show that relationship, I have taken air resistance is some constant multiplied by the velocity at that time. Now, since there are two forces acting on our raindrop, the net force F net is going to be F of t, which is gravity, minus air resistance rho v of t. Now, according to Newton's second law, net force will be equal to mass into net acceleration. To denote acceleration at that particular time, I will write A of t. So from here, we get A of t is F of t minus rho v of t divided by mass. But acceleration is d by dt of velocity. So I can write dv of t by dt for acceleration. This is equal to f of t by m minus rho by m v of t. Let's rearrange this a little bit by taking this term to the other side. So we get dv of t by dt plus rho by m v of t is equal to 1 by m multiplied by f of t. Let's put this in a box. Now you can see that this is again a differential equation and it gives us the relationship between the input and the output. Our input is f of t over here and output is v of t, which you can see over here. Let us now compare the two equations we got from our two examples. They both have the same form. So let's write a general form of these equations. The first term is d by dt of the output. I'll call the output y of t. So dy of t by dt plus, then I have a constant here. I'll call it a, which is multiplied with the output. So multiplied with y of t. This is equal to, on the right hand side, we have the input multiplied with some constant. So I'll write b x of t. Let's put this in a nicer box. Here x of t is our input, y of t is our output, a and b are some constants. Now what I am thinking is that I took two very random situations. One was an RC circuit, the other one was a raindrop falling down, but finally I got very similar equations. So that must mean there has to be a group of situations where I'll be able to describe them using the same equation. So the conclusion I'd like to make here is this. Methods of analyzing general classes of systems can be developed and used in wide variety of applications. That is, if I can find out a method to analyze this particular differential equation, then maybe I can analyze lots of systems that can be defined using similar equations. Let's go to discrete time systems now. In discrete time systems, the input and output are going to be discrete. It will take in a discrete input x of n and transform it into a discrete output y of n. Let's see an example for a discrete time system. So what we're going to calculate is the balance in a bank account from month to month. I'll take y of n as the balance at the end of nth month. So obviously y of n minus 1 will be the balance at the end of n minus 1th month. Let's say x of n is my deposit in the nth month. So every month I am putting some deposit also. Plus there is some interest rate. 5% interest is there. So whatever is my balance, the bank will give me 5% interest as well. So x of n, that is the money I am depositing, will be our input. Y of n, that is the balance at the end of the nth month, is going to be our output. Let us write a relation between these. So at the end of the month, y of n, the total balance is going to be, obviously I'll be adding x of n because I'm depositing that much, plus what I get is y of n minus 1 because that much money was already in the bank account. So y of n minus 1 plus what? I'm also getting interest at the rate 5%. So I'll get an extra 5% of my previous month balance. That is 5% of previous month balance also. So the sum of all of these is going to be my current month's balance. Together we can write it like this. It's x of n plus 1.05 times y of n minus 1. Let's rearrange this a little bit by taking this term to the other side. So we get y of n minus 1.05 y of n minus 1 is equal to x of n. Let's put this in a box. Remember when we were learning properties of discrete time signals, we learned that the property that is analogous to differentiation in continuous time signal is difference in discrete time signal. We even calculated first difference. And this is actually a first difference equation because we are taking y of n minus y of n minus 1. So this is a difference equation that describes the relationship between input, which is x of n, and output, which is y of n. You can see X of n over here and Y of n and its shifted version over here. Let's take another example. A store restocks an item every week. So every week they're bringing in more number of the item. Y of n will take it as the number of items we have in the end of the nth week. Obviously, y of n minus 1 will be what we have in the n minus 1th week. X of n is the restock in the nth week. However many we are bringing new. And sale per week is 50%. Whatever is there, 50% has been sold every week. So let's write down what will be y of n. Obviously, I am adding x of n. This is the new items I'm bringing. So I'll have x of n plus whatever I had in the previous week, 50% is sold. So the rest 50% will be there. So I have 50% of y of n minus 1 as well. Let's bring this term to the other side. So we get y of n minus 0.5 y of n minus 1 is equal to x of n. Obviously, this is also a difference equation. So this is also a difference equation that gives us the relationship between the input and the output. Let's compare the two equations we got in the two examples. We can see that both are examples of the same first order linear difference equation. As a general form, I can write first term is y of n, the output, minus, there are some constants multiplied with y of n minus 1. So I'll write a y of n minus 1 is equal to, in these cases we have taken x of n, but there could be a constant also. So as a general form, I'll write bx of n, b being a constant. Let's put this in a nice box. Here x of n is input, y of n is output, a and b are constants. What can we conclude from here? I took two random examples and I got very similar looking equations. Now, just like we said before, this has to be a sign that there are lots of situations where we can use the same equation to define them. And that means methods for analyzing general classes of systems can be developed and used in wide variety of applications. I can develop a method to solve this particular equation and then I can use it in a lot of applications. The next topic we are learning is interconnection of systems, because many real life systems are actually interconnections of subsystems. There are different ways in which we can interconnect systems. The first one is series interconnection, or you can call it cascade interconnection. In series interconnection, we connect the systems like this. This is an example. You can see we're giving input to system 1. Its output is given as input to system 2, and then we're taking the output. These are also called block diagrams. For example, let's say you have a coffee grinder and a coffee maker. You take your coffee beans, give it as input to the coffee grinder. The output will be grinded coffee beans. Then you put it into next system, which is coffee maker, and you get the final output, coffee. The next way of interconnecting systems is parallel interconnection. You give the same input to two systems, system 1 and system 2. System 1 gives one output, system 2 gives another output, and we add them. This symbol is for summation. So the final output you get will be the sum of outputs of the systems 1 and 2. Let's take an example. We have two mics. Two people are singing a duet. So they have two mics, but they are both connected to the same speaker. So sound will be given as an input to both of them, and then their individual outputs are summed. So in the final output, we'll get mixed sound. This is what we call parallel interconnection. A system may also be realized using series and parallel interconnection. That is, for example, let's say there are two mics. We take their individual outputs, add them, we get a parallel connection over here, and then its output is connected as an input to the speaker. So you can say this part and this part is actually in series also. Finally, you get the mixed signal. So here you cannot with 100% surety say that this is series or a parallel, because we have series connection and parallel connection here. So that is another way you can interconnect systems, series parallel interconnection. Now, the last and the most important way of interconnecting systems is the feedback interconnection. Here, what we do is we give input, it will go into system 1, output is coming. Then we take some part of the output, then it goes through system 2. Output of system 2 is fed back to the input of system 1. That's why we have an plus symbol here. A part of the output is taken and it is fed back into the input. For example, let's take there is a thermostat in your room. Obviously, you want it to change the temperature of the room automatically. So, what we do is the output will be taken and it goes through a temperature sensor which gives a part of it to the input. So, if the temperature is too much, the thermostat will decrease it. If the temperature is too less, the thermostat will increase it. The temperature sensor is technically giving it a feedback on the output. Now that we are all good with systems, let's learn some basic properties of systems. We will learn memory, invertibility, causality, stability, time invariance, and linearity. Let us start with the memory. A system without memory can be defined like this: output for each value at a given time only depends on the input at that same time. We can call such a system memoryless system, or we can also call it a static system. Let me make you understand this better using an example. The first example I am taking is y of n is equal to 2x of n minus x square of n. Now, imagine you're trying to find out y of n at n is equal to 2. You want to find out y of 2. What are the things that you need? We have x of n over here. So you will need x of 2. And the next term is x square of n. So you will just be squaring this. So to get y of 2, you only need to know x of 2, not x of 1. X of 1 happened before. You don't need that. You also don't need x of 0 or x of minus 1. All you need is the input at that particular time, 2. So you can call this a memoryless system. Let's take another example. I'll take a resistor. How is a resistor a memoryless system? According to Ohm's law, voltage across the resistor is current through the resistor multiplied by the resistance. Let us take voltage as the output and I as the input. So I can write this as y of t is equal to a constant R multiplied by x of t, the input. Now again imagine you want to find out the voltage at t equals 3 seconds. That is, you want to find out y of 3. What are the things that you need? You know the value of resistor, that's not a function of time. Then you need x of t. So at 3 seconds, you need x of 3. To find out y of 3, all you need is the value of input at 3 itself. That is, you do not need to know the value of the input before or after 3 seconds. Hence, this is a memoryless system. I'll take a third example, a simple example. Let's say y of t is equal to x of t. Obviously, to get y of t, you need to know x of t at the same time. And how about y of n is equal to x of n? These should be like the simplest cases of memoryless systems. The systems defined by these equations have a name. They are called identity systems. Let us now take the case of systems with memory. Here, output for each value at a given time will also depend on previous input. That is, the system will have to remember previous inputs. These are also called dynamic systems. Let's understand better with an example. The first one is y of n is equal to x of n minus 1. So here, if you want to find out y of 2, you will have to know x of 2 minus 1, x of 1. So when I say you, I'm actually talking about the system. The system wants to give an output y of 2. The system will have to know what is x of 1, which is a previous input. So the system that is defined using this equation is going to be a dynamic system with memory. Second example is a capacitor. We can write the potential across capacitor like this: 1 by C integral from minus infinity to t I dt. Let's say v is the output, y of t, I is the input, x of t. So we can write y of t is 1 by c integral from minus infinity to t x of tau d tau. Don't worry that I took tau over here as the variable. It doesn't matter as long as I'm giving the right limit. Because after integrating, I'll be giving the limits anyways from minus infinity to t. So my equation is going to come out as a function of time. So it doesn't matter what variable you're taking inside the integration. But the important point is that here we are integrating from minus infinity to t. So the system has to know the value of input from minus infinity to the current time, which means all of the previous inputs. So a capacitor is a system that has memory. The third example, y of n is equal to y of n minus 1 plus x of n. Here, the system need not know previous values of x of n, but it needs to know a previous value of the output y of n. So let's modify the definition a little bit. We have written output for each value at a given time also depends on previous inputs. Let's write inputs or outputs. Now, what does this system do? So let us say x of n is this. It gives 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. and 1 is the zeroth term. Let's write y of 0. Y of 0 is going to be y of minus 1 plus x of n. There is no y of minus 1 because there are no terms over here. So we'll just add x of n, which is 1. Now y of 1 is going to be y of 0 plus the current value. So y of 0 is 1 plus current value 2. Then if you write y of 2, it is previous output 1 plus 2, 3 plus the current input, which is 3. So 3 plus 3. You can see what is happening here. This system just keeps adding the new value over and over. First it had 1, then it added 2 to it, 1 plus 2, then it added 3 to it, 1 plus 2 plus 3, then it added 4 to it, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. This system is nothing but an accumulator. This is the difference equation that defines an accumulator. And most importantly, it has memory. Now, something we have to note here is that a system is said to have memory if its current output depends on future values of input or output also. So, we were talking about past values, but even if they depend on future values, that is also considered a system with memory. Now, this might seem a little unnatural to you right now because how can a system know the future values of input or output? Because it hasn't happened yet. So, how will such a case come into reality in the first place? As an example, this can actually happen in a predictive system. Let's say somebody is designing a system to predict the stock market. That system might be using some future inputs or outputs to generate the current output. Let's go to the next property, which is invertibility. The condition for a system to be invertible is that it should give distinct outputs for distinct inputs. For example, let us say there is a system. If I give 1 as input, it gives 2. If I give 3 as input, it is giving 1. If I give 5 as input, it is again giving 2. Now I am standing over here. I am looking at the outputs 2, 1, 2. Will I be able to design a system that does exactly the opposite of what this system does? No, because I can see 2 is the output of 1, 2 is also the output of 5. So if the output sequence is 2, 1, 2, I don't know if the 2 came from a 1 input or a 5 input. So it will be impossible to do that. But if instead of 2, I had got 3, then it is possible. Wherever I have 2, I know the input came from. Wherever I get 1, I know the input was 3. Wherever I got 3, I know the input was 5. That is, for distinct inputs, we have distinct outputs. In case a system is invertible, then obviously an inverse of that system exists. So let's say we gave x of n to an invertible system, it gave y of n out. Now, if you give y of n as an input to its inverse, then obviously you would get the original input as the output here. Let us write some examples for invertible systems. The first one I'm going to take is y of t is equal to 2x of t. I can easily write the inverse. X of t is equal to y of t divided by 2. This is the inverse operation of this one. Let's take another example. An accumulator. We already know accumulator is defined by the difference equation. Y of n is equal to y of n minus 1 plus x of n. That is previous output plus the current input. Easily we can write the equation by which its inverse can be defined. Inverse will be x of n is equal to y of n minus y of n minus 1. What you have to do is take current output, subtract the previous output, so you will get the current input. Let's see some examples of non-invertible systems. A system that is defined by the equation y of n equal to 0 is going to be non-invertible because the output to any input is 0. The output sequence I'm going to get will look like this: 0, 0, 0, etc. Like that. So, how will I know for what input I got each 0? There is no way. So, this is not invertible. Let's take another example. The system is defined by y of t is equal to square of x of t. We have the same problem here also. If I give 2 as the input, I will get 4. If I give minus 2 as the input, still I'll get 4. So looking at the 4, which is the output, I cannot tell where it came from. Did it come from input 2 or did it come from minus 2? So there is no way we can design an inverse system for a system that is defined by y of t equal to x square of t. Let's move on to the next property, which is called causality. The definition of a causal system is this: output at any time only depends on values of input at the present time and the past, which means it cannot depend on the values of input or output in the future. So, automatically, all the memoryless systems become causal because they only depend on the value of input at the current time. Let's take some examples for causal systems. The first one is the same RC circuit we dealt with before. Obviously, the output VC, which is the potential across the capacitor C, will only depend on the current and past values of the source voltage. So, the system is causal. The second example is the motion of a car. Very evidently, the motion of a car will only depend on the present and past actions of the driver. It cannot move according to the future actions of the driver, so it is also an example for a causal system. Let's also see examples for non causal systems. The first one is y of n is equal to x of n minus x of n plus 1. Here, let's say you want to find out y of 2. You need x of 2 because you have x of n there. You also need x of 3 because you need x of n plus 1. So, the system that is defined by this difference equation is gonna need to know the future value of an input. So, it is non causal. Another example is y of t is equal to x of t plus 1. So, to get y of 2, the system would have to know x of 3. That makes it non causal. Let us now solve a problem. We have to check for causality. The equation is y of n equals x of minus 2n. Let's take an example for n. Let's say n is equal to 4. According to the equation, y of 4 will be equal to x of minus 2 times 4, so x of minus 8. That is, to produce y of 4, the system needs to know x of minus 8, which obviously is a past input. And a causal system is allowed to depend on the current and past inputs or outputs. So this seems to be rightest for a causal system. In fact, whatever positive value you give for 4, the system will need past inputs. For y of 6, it will need x of minus 6. But the question is, what if you give a negative number? Let's say n is equal to minus 4. So y of minus 4 is going to be x of minus 2 into minus 4, x of 8. To get y of minus 4, the system needs to use x of 8, which obviously is a future input. So we have to conclude that this system is non-causal. Let's take another example. Y of t is x of t multiplied by sine of t plus 1. Y of t is x of t multiplied by sine of t plus 1. On the first look, you can see that there is t plus 1. So it has to be non causal, right? Because it depends on something that happens in the future. But actually, sine of t plus 1, isn't it just a function of t? If I give t equal to 2, that becomes sine 3. If I give t equals 1000, it just becomes sine of 1001. So it's not actually a function of t plus 1, it is just a function of t. You give t, you'll get a value of sine of t plus 1. So this is a tricky question. And sine of t plus 1 is actually just a function of t. We can call it g of t. The equation can be simplified like this: y of t is equal to x of t multiplied by g of t. For example, to get y of 2, the system needs x of 2 and g of 2. And g of 2 is going to be sine 3. And everybody knows what is sine 3 as long as you have a calculator. So the system will be able to find that. So this is not a non-causal system, even though the first time you see it, you will think it is non-causal. So let's conclude this is a causal system. And not only just causal, you can see that this only depends on the values of inputs at the exact same time, not previous values. That is, the system that is defined by this particular equation is also memoryless. The next property is stability. The definition of a stable system is this: if the input is bounded, then the output will also be bounded. We can call this bounded input, bounded output, BIBO. Let's take a very simple example. There are two balls. One is on top of something that looks like this, and one is at the bottom of something that looks like this. Now imagine I pushed this particular ball towards left a little bit. We all know it will just keep going away. If I move it a little bit towards right, still it will keep going away. On the other hand, if I take this ball, move it a little bit towards left over here, it will come back to the original position. If I move it a little bit towards this side, it will again come back to the original position. So we can call this system to be stable because it keeps coming back to the original position. This is unstable because it will just keep going away. In both cases, we gave a bounded input. All we did was a simple push. But in the first case, the output went out of our hands. In the second case, though, output was also bounded, it simply came back. Another example we can take is that of the raindrop that was falling down. It has some velocity v at all times. The gravitational force acting on it is f of t. We'll take it as the input. Its velocity v of t, we take it as the output. Now, gravity is not the only force acting on it. There is air resistance as well, and it is proportional to the velocity at that particular time. So we took it as a constant multiplied by velocity at the time. Now, as the raindrop keeps falling down under the effect of gravity, it will be accelerated by acceleration due to gravity. Obviously, its velocity will keep increasing, but air resistance is directly proportional to the velocity. As velocity increases, air resistance also increases. At some point, air resistance will be equal to the gravity because gravity doesn't increase, it's just the weight of the raindrop, it's a constant. At the same time, air resistance keeps increasing with velocity. So at some point, they become equal, and net force on the raindrop becomes zero, which means net acceleration is zero, which means its velocity will now become constant. We call this terminal velocity. Here we gave a bounded input, that is the attraction due to gravity. And the output, which is velocity, also didn't go out of our hand. It became a constant, which means it is bounded. So we can conclude this is an example for a stable system. Let's take more examples. We have y of n is summation from k equal to 0 to n u of k. It's an accumulator, but we're accumulating outputs of u of k, which is the unit step signal. We know unit step signal has value 1 everywhere, which means input here is a unit step signal. It can only take a value 1, which means input is bounded. Now, let's see what happens to output as we keep changing n. At n equal to 0, y of 0 is going to be summation from 0 to 0 u of k. That is just u of 0, which is 1. If I take u of 1, it will be u of 0 plus u of 1. That is 1 plus 1, 2. If I take y of 2, then I'll get u of 0 plus u of 1 plus u of 2. 1 plus 1 plus 1, 3. It will go on like that. If I take n equals 1000, I'll get 1000 as the value. That means the output is not bounded. The input can only take values 1 for any value of n. So it is bounded, but y of n, as we change n, is going out of our hands. So this system is unstable. And the reason is y of n is not bounded. Let us solve a problem now. We have to check the stability of systems that are defined by these equations. The first one is y of t is t x of t. Let's assume the input x of t is bounded. That is, it has a certain set of values that it can take. It doesn't go to infinity from minus infinity. For example, let's say x of t is 2 everywhere. For all value of t, x of t is 2. It is bounded. Let us see what we will get for y of t for different values of t in that case. For y of 1, I will get tx of t, so 1 into 2, 2. For y of 2, I will get 2 into 2, so 4. For y of 3, I will get 3 into 2, 6. Okay, what if I take y of 10,000? I will get 10,000 multiplied by 2, that is 20,000. Obviously, this is going out of our hands. As we keep increasing t, the value of y of t is increasing very much. So this ball keeps going away even after we only gave a small push. We can easily conclude this is unstable. The next system is defined by y of t is equal to e raised to x of t. Again, let's assume x of t is bounded. For example, let's say x of t is between minus a and a. Minus a is less than x of t, which is less than a. X of t is bounded between minus a and a. So for whatever value of t you give, x of t is going to have values between minus a and a because it is bounded. Now let's see what y of t is going to look like for different values of t. Y of t is e raised to x of t. That is, the power of e can only take values that x of t can take, which is from minus a to a. So obviously, y of t is going to be between e raised to minus a to e raised to a. So e raised to minus a less than y of t less than e raised to a. It doesn't matter what value you're giving to t. Since x of t can take only values between minus a and a, y of t is going to be always between e raised to minus a and e raised to a. So y of t is also bounded. This system has to be stable. The next property we have to learn is time invariance. A system is called time invariant if its behavior and characteristics are fixed over time. That is, the system gives the same output for the same input even when you give 100 years later. Its characteristics and behavior does not depend on time. It does not change with time. Or we could say time shift in input results in the same shift in output. Let's say x of n gives y of n as the output. Then if you're giving x of n minus n naught, you should get y of n minus n naught. Same time shift in both input and output. In that case, we can say it is not changing with time, it is time invariant. An example we can take is the RC circuit again. As long as the R value and C value are constant, you will always get the same result for the same input. Let's say in the 1900, someone gave 2 volt here and they got some 1.5 volt here. In 2000, if someone gives 2 volt here, they'll still get 1.5 volt. So if R and C are constants, there will be the same output for the same input at all times. So this system is time invariant. Let us solve a problem. We have to check the system that is defined by this equation for time invariance. We have y of t, which is sine of x of t. Let us take a sample input x1 of t. When you gave x1 of t as the input, the output you got y1 of t was equal to sine of x1 of t. Now we'll take another input x2 of t, but x2 of t is a time shifted version of x1 of t. That is, x2 of t is x1 of t minus t naught. If you give x2 of t, you will get y2 of t, which will be equal to sine of x2 of t. But x2 of t is x1 of t minus t naught. So I'll just write this is sine of x1 of t minus t naught. Our condition for a time invariant system was that for a particular time shift in the input, we should get the same time shift in the output. So let us see what would happen if we gave the same time shift in the output. If we took y1 of t minus t naught, since y1 of t is sine of x1 of t, t will become t minus t naught and we'll get sine of x1 of t minus t naught. And this is the same as the output we got when we gave an input that was a time shifted version of the original input. That is, x1 of t minus t naught did give us y1 of t minus t naught. So we can conclude this system is time invariant. The next one is a system that is defined by y of n is equal to n x of n. We have y of n is equal to n x of n. Let's give a sample input x1 of n. Then you will get y1 of n and it will be equal to n x1 of n. Let's take another sample input x2 of n, which is actually a time shifted version of x1 of n. x2 of n is x1 of n minus n naught. I am giving this as the input to the system. So I'll get y2 of n, which will be obviously n x2 of n, but x2 of n is x1 of n minus n naught. So we get n x1 of n minus n naught. This is the output we get for a time shifted input. Our condition is that same time shift should happen in the output as well. So let us try to find out what is y1 of n minus n naught. We need y1 of n minus n naught. y1 of n is n x1 of n. So when I change n to n minus n naught, I'll have to change this n and this n to n minus n naught. We will get y1 of n minus n naught is n minus n naught multiplied by x1 of n minus n naught. Now, this is not the same as this. x1 of n gave us y1 of n, but x1 of n minus n naught did not give us y1 of n minus n naught. The system is time varying. Let us take another example of a system that is defined by y of t is equal to x of 2t. We'll do the same thing. Y of t is x of 2t. Take a sample input x1 of t, which gives you y1 of t, and it will be x1 of 2t. Take another sample input x2 of t, which is a time shifted version of x1 of t. So it is x1 of t minus t naught. Now give it as the input. So output will be y2 of t. That will be x2 of 2t according to the definition given in the question. But x2 of t is x1 of t minus t naught. So you get x1 of 2t minus t naught. Why did I not write 2 into t minus t naught? Because x2 of t gave me x1 of t minus t naught. I have only changed the coefficient of t here. T became 2t. So here also t will become 2t, not t minus t naught. I am not touching t naught. Now let us check if this is going to be equal to the shifted output y1 of t minus t naught. Y of t is x of 2t. Y of t is x of 2t. T became t minus t naught. So this t will have to become t minus t naught. So I'll get x of 2 into t minus t naught. In this case, it is 2 into t minus t naught. The 2 is affecting t naught as well. You have to clearly understand what happened here. So this is x of 2t minus 2t naught. Obviously, these two are not equal. Our x1 of t did give us y1 of t, but x1 of t minus t naught did not give us y1 of t minus t naught. That is, this system is also time varying. The next property we have to learn is linearity. A system is called linear if for an input that contains the weighted sum of many signals, the output will be the weighted sum of the individual responses. That is, let's say x1 of t gave an output y1 of t and x2 of t gave an output y2 of t. When you give the output x1 of t plus x2 of t and you get y1 of t plus y2 of t as the output, the first condition to become linearity. This is called additivity. Again, let us say x of t gave you an output y of t, and when you gave a x of t, where a is a complex constant, and you got a y of t. This is the second condition for a system to be linear, and this is called homogeneity. If a system satisfies both conditions, then it is linear. There is also another very important condition that a linear system has to satisfy, that is, zero input should give a zero output. If the input is zero, output should also be zero. We call it ZI-ZO. Together we can write it this way: a x1 of t plus b x2 of t. This is my input. Then this should give me a y1 of t and b y2 of t. For a discrete system, we can write a similar equation: a x1 of n plus b x2 of n should give an output equal to a y1 of n plus b y2 of n. An important factor here is that a and b are complex constants. That is, they can take imaginary values as well. We can actually write this as a summation because the system can have multiple inputs, not just two. So, as a general case, we can write like this: if x of n is summation for all values of k, a k x of k, then for a linear system, y of n will be summation for all values of k, a k, y of k. We call this the superposition property. Let us solve a problem. We have a system that is defined by the equation y of t is equal to tx of t. We have to check if it is linear or not. Let's take an example x1 of t. x1 of t gave us y1 of t, and according to the question, y1 of t will be equal to tx1 of t. Let's take another sample input x2 of t, and it will give an output y2 of t, which will be equal to tx2 of t. Let us say there is another input x3 of t, but it is actually the weighted sum of the first two inputs. x3 of t is a x1 of t plus b x2 of t. Now let's give x3 of t as an input. So we will get y3 of t. According to the definition in the question, y3 of t will be t x3 of t. But x3 of t is ax1 of t plus bx2 of t. So this becomes t multiplied by ax1 of t plus bx2 of t. That is a t x1 of t plus b t x2 of t. Now tx1 of t is y1 of t. tx2 of t is y2 of t. So this becomes a y1 of t plus b y2 of t. So for an input ax1 of t plus bx2 of t, the output was a y1 of t plus b y2 of t. Obviously, this system is linear. Let's take another example. Here we have a system defined by the equation y of t is x square of t. Let's give x1 of t as an input. We will get y1 of t is equal to x1 square of t. Similarly, x2 of t will give y2 of t, and it will be equal to x2 square of t. Let's take x3 of t, which is the weighted sum of the first two inputs, ax1 of t plus bx2 of t. If you give this as an input, you will get y3 of t. According to the definition in the question, y3 of t will be x square 3 of t. But x3 of t is ax1 of t plus bx2 of t. So this is ax1 of t plus bx2 of t, the whole square. So that will be equal to a square x1 square of t plus b square x2 square of t plus 2ab x1 of t multiplied by x2 of t. That is, for an input ax1 of t plus bx2 of t, we definitely did not get ay1 of t plus ay2 of t. This system is non-linear. Let's solve another question. We have a discrete time system that is defined by the equation y of n is equal to real part of x of n. Since we are taking real part and all, let's take x of n to be a complex function. That is, x of n, let it be equal to r of n plus j s of n. So r of n will be the real part, s of n will be the imaginary part. Take a sample input x1 of n. x1 of n will be equal to r1 of n plus j s1 of n. If you give this as the input, you will get y1 of n as the output. y1 of n is the real part of x1 of n. So you will get r1 of n. Take another input x2 of n. Let's say x2 of n is equal to a x1 of n. When we were learning the homogeneity conditions, we said that a is a constant. Not just that, a is a complex constant. So let's take case 1 where a is real. Now, if you give a x1 of n as the input, you will get y1 of n as the output, and it will be equal to real part of a x1 of n, but x1 of n is r1 of n plus j s1 of n. So a r1 of n plus j a s1 of n. Here the real part is a r1 of n, But R1 of n was the output we got for X1 of n. It is Y1 of n. So this is equal to A Y1 of n. When A is real, for an input ax1 of n, we did get ay of n. So the system satisfies homogeneity condition. Let's take case 2 where A is purely complex. As an example, let's just take A is equal to j. Then, if you're giving x2 of n, ax1 of n as the input, you will get y1 of n as the output. It will be real part of ax1 of n, but a is j, so j. x1 of n is r1 of n plus j s1 of n. That is, we'll get a real part of j r1 of n plus j into j becomes minus 1. So let's change it to minus s1 of n. Here, obviously, j r1 of n is the imaginary part, minus s1 of n is the real part. So output is minus s1 of n. That is, for ax1 of n as input, you did not get ay1 of n as output. The system violates homogeneity, and hence it is unstable. Now, this is such a case where you actually have to remember that a can be a complex number as well. If you did not remember it, you will just write up to this and you will think, I got a y1 of n for ax1 of n, this has to be stable. But only if you remember a can be complex as well, that you understand that the system is actually unstable. Let's take another question. The system is defined by y of n is equal to 2x of n plus 3. We have y of n is 2x of n plus 3. Now, this is obviously a linear equation. Let us check if the system is linear as well. Let's take examples. Take x1 of n is equal to 2 and x2 of n is equal to 3. Then y1 of n is going to be 2x1 of n plus 3, that is 4 plus 3 7, and y2 of n is going to be 2x2 of 3 plus 3, that is 9. Let us take another input x3 of n, which is the sum of x1 of n and x2 of n. That is, it will be 2 plus 3, 5. So y3 of n according to the definition will be 2x3 of n plus 3, that is 10 plus 3, 13. But y1 of n plus y2 of n is 7 plus 9, that is 16. So input x1 of n plus x2 of n did not give us y1 of n plus y2 of n. So it is non-linear. And not just that, this system also violates the 0 input, 0 output condition. If you give x of n equal to 0, that is 0 input, y of n will not be 0, it will still give you 3. If a system behaves this way, we call this output 0 input response. An important property of these kinds of systems is that they can be represented as the sum of a linear system and another signal that is equal to the 0 input response of the system. That is, you give x of n as input, you get y dash of n as an output, then you add y naught of n, which is the 0 input response to it, and finally get the final output y of n. As an example, let's take the previous question itself. Y of n is 2x of n plus 3. Let's say there is a linear system that multiplies the signal. X of n was given as an input, 2x of n is given as an output. Obviously, this is a linear system. Now, let's say we add the 0 input response to it and the 0 input response is equal to 3. The final output will be 2x of n plus 3. Conclusion is, it can be represented as the sum of a linear system and another signal that is equal to the 0 input response of the system. 0 input response is the output it gives when input is equal to 0. Such systems have a name. We call them incrementally linear systems. We can say it is a superposition of a linear system with a zero input response. To recognize an incrementally linear system, you can think this way. The difference between the responses to any two inputs will be a linear function of the difference between the two inputs. Let's verify this with the same example. Y of n is equal to 2x of n plus 3. Let's say you gave an input x1 of n and you got y1 of n, which is equal to 2x1 of n plus 3. And you gave x2 of n as input and y2 of n was 2x2 of n plus 3. Let's take the difference between the responses. Y1 of n minus y2 of n. So 2x1 of n plus 3 minus 2x2 of n minus 3. 3 and 3 gets cancelled. We have 2 times x1 of n minus x2 of n. That is, difference between two inputs is a linear function of the difference between their corresponding outputs. So that's all about it for now. See you in the next video. And don't forget to subscribe.